All right. Thanks for coming. I'm Chris Thompson. This is Diego Lomellini. Today we're going to be talking about our tool, SharpSCCM. If you'd like to check out the GitHub repository for the tool, it's right here. We're also going to post all the slides with some additional information after this talk. I'll just post them up onto the SharpSCCM repo so you have all the information. Don't have to take pictures or capture anything. All right, so what are we going to do during this talk? We're going to quickly review some SharpSCCM commands that are pretty useful for credential gathering, lateral movement, recon in an environment where there are Windows systems that are SCCM clients. We'll talk about SCCM site takeovers. What does that even mean? How do we do it? A demo, and then how do we prevent or detect site takeover attacks? After that, we'll talk about accomplishing objectives with SharpSCCM. Diego wrote some additions to the tool recently that allow you to use the admin service and CM pivot to do a lot of really cool things across groups of clients at once. So here's some useful SharpSCCM commands. This is more of a reference. The first three are local commands. If you're executing on a Windows client, that's a SCCM client. The first one identifies what your management point is. The second one will dump any network access accounts, collection variables, and task sequences that may contain clear text credentials, and it will attempt to decrypt them. Local triage will just dump a bunch of logs from the client to try and identify servers. And then when you have escalated privileges in the SCCM environment, the exec command will let you run a command or execute a binary on any client or any group of clients at the same time. The get command retrieves information over WMI from the SCCM SMS provider or the management point. So something like the get secrets command is the same thing as the local secrets one, but it retrieves those through policy from the management point. But the three commands that we're going to talk most about today are the get site info command, which identifies the primary site server, which is really useful for site takeovers. The invoke admin service command that allows you to run CM pivot queries across groups of endpoints. And the invoke client push command, which allows you to coerce authentication from the primary site server. All right, so site takeover. What does that mean? Can anyone tell me for a t-shirt? Just say anything, I'll give you a t-shirt. All right, so if you obtain the full administrator role in SCCM, it allows you to control the entire site. You have access to all objects, all systems, all users that are clients of SCCM. So that's how you take over the site, is to gain this full administrator role. And why do we care? It allows you to execute arbitrary commands across every client across the fleet, all at once. So the key concept to this, I'll give you a hint, is that primary site server's domain computer account. The design of SCCM is that this account has administrative access to the site database server. It has administrative access to every other system that is hosting an SCCM role. So the distribution points, management points, software update points, SMS providers, all of them. This account, this computer account, is admin on that. And it's also used for client push installation by default if there's no other accounts that are defined or if those fail to authenticate to install the SCCM client on an endpoint. So the reason that matters is if we can coerce authentication from the primary site server's domain computer account, then we can relay it to the site database, add ourselves to that full administrator role, and take over the site. There's a bunch of ways you can do this, and this is a condensed version of the list. I'm not going to read it all. It's more of a reference, but starting with the top left is kind of the way that we see and hear that people take over SCCM the most is just overprivileged credentials. Credentials that are pushed out to every SCCM client, like the network access account, collection variables, and task sequences. A lot of times admins just put administrator credentials in there, and you can decrypt them and take over the site. The rest of these rely on the primary site server machine account being administrator on those various roles. And the one that we're going to focus on today is this one right here. We're going to relay NTLM to the site database. We're going to coerce authentication from the site server. We're going to use client push installation to do this, but you can also just use something like coercer or petit patam or spool sample to hit that RPC service and request that authentication. As long as you can reach 445 on the site server, you can probably coerce authentication from it, which is terrifying because you can relay it to all these different site systems and take them over. And then once we're on the database, we'll grant ourselves the full administrator role, and that'll allow us full control of every client in the site. All right, going to go through a quick demo here. So this is the lab environment that we're working in. We have one SCCM client in here that's running Windows. There we go. We have a management point, a site server, and a site database. And we're going to be operating just from a Kali box in order to do the coercion relay. Skip ahead a little bit here. Maybe. PowerPoint's not behaving right now. Give me just a minute. All right, backup plan. Set takeover demo. Sweet. They say do a recording and not a live demo, and this is what happens. Yeah. All right, let's try it one more time. Otherwise, I'll just pull up the video. What's that? Yeah. Let me give it one more shot here. Slideshow. All right, I'm not going to touch it anymore. We're just going to let it ride. All right, again, we've got the primary site server, named site server, the Kali machine that we're going to do the relay from, and the site database where we're going to relay the credentials to take over the site. First command we're going to run is the get site info command on our domain. This identifies the primary site server because it has generic all permission on an Active Directory container. So in all likelihood, any computer accounts with that permission are going to be configuration manager servers. And then we're going to grab the hex encoded SID for the user that we're going to add to the full administrator group, which is called low priv. Next, we're going to stand up NTLM Relay X on our Kali box. We're going to listen on the IP address ending in 130, and we're going to relay the incoming SMB authentication to the MS SQL service on the site database ending in .51. And then we're going to start a SOX proxy so that we can relay additional tools through that connection. Next, we're going to coerce authentication from the primary site server, and we're going to target our listener. We're going to do that by registering a fake device with a management point. Once the management point accepts that request, it's going to issue us a device ID, and then we're going to follow up and say, the client's not installed on this new device. Can you install it? And the primary site server will authenticate to our fake device wherever we tell it to, and then we're going to relay that to the site database. Here we see that the site server authenticated to our system running NTLM Relay X, and it's authenticated to the site database MS SQL service as the primary site server's machine account. That's going to start a SOX proxy for us that we're going to connect to in order to interact with the database. Real quick, we're just going to check our proxy chain's configuration and make sure we're forwarding through port 1080. And then we're going to proxy the Impacket MS SQL client through our SOX proxy to the site database uh, as the primary site server's machine account. It's going to prompt us for a password, but you can just press enter here because we've already authenticated. And then once we have access to this SQL prompt, we're going to enter the site database, which is CM underscore and then the 3-character site code, which in our case is PS1. Once we're in the CM PS1 database, we are going to add ourselves to the RBAC admins group using that hex SID for the user that we grabbed earlier from our workstation. So this isn't the only thing you need to do. In addition to adding yourself to the admin group, you need to grant yourself the permissions on the all objects group, the all systems group, and the all users group in order to manipulate those objects and really obtain the full administrator role. So after adding yourself to the RBAC admins group, it'll generate this ID for you, and that's what we're going to use to add those extended permissions. The first one grants you all objects access. The second one that we're going to run will grant all systems, and the third will grant all users. After that, we're going to go over to the site server and just double check our permissions, and we see that our low priv account is now part of the full administrator role, which grants us complete access to all the clients. Again, we did this with SharpSCCM, but it's much easier to just do with Petit Patam and relay it straight to the site database or any other role to take over. There's a few more prerequisites for using the client push method that we used here. It comes in handy if you don't have 445 access to the site server, but have access to a management point and automatic client push is enabled in the environment. And then this command we ran here was just to verify that our low privilege user now has the ability to query all objects. And yay, we made it through the demo. So what do we do about this? How do we stop this from happening? So really, it comes down to preventing or detecting NTLM relay attacks in the environment. So you can require SMB signing on the servers that are hosting site system roles. That will prevent the relayed credentials from being able to authenticate there. Same thing for the MS SQL attack that we did. If you require extended protection for authentication on your site database servers, that will prevent those relay credentials from being usable. Of course, you can block unnecessary connections to those servers hosting the site system roles, but that will not completely prevent the attack if an attacker proxies through systems that do have connectivity. So definitely those first 3 bullets are the most important mitigations. And then to detect these attacks, if your primary site server computer account is authenticating from an IP address that is not the primary site server, you have a problem. And that's probably the best way to detect these. Same thing for client push installation accounts authenticating from systems that are not the site server. Really, the only thing client push installation accounts should be doing is installing the client. All right, so I'm going to pass this over to Diego, and he's going to talk about what we can do now that we have these full administrator privileges.
All right. All right. So Chris just showed you some of the cool stuff you can do. Chris just showed you some of that cool stuff you can do with SharpSCCM and how to abuse those attack paths too. Now, there are some things, that we can do as a full administrator. For example, you can deploy an application to a certain device collection, okay? And in this case, this will be a malicious application, right? You can also use that mechanism to coerce those clients and have them contact a server, a relay server, for example. You could do that too. Now, another thing you can do with full administrator privileges is to abuse something called CM Pivot. So CM Pivot is a component of the configuration manager, and it's meant to collect real-time data from this host, this client host, part of the SCCM side. Okay. Now, the way let me show you the demo just for a second. Oh, did I kill it? All right. So the way it works is, in this case, we're targeting one of the clients, and this would be the CM Pivot console. Okay. Within the console, on the left, you can see all the many entities and queries that you can actually use to collect that real-time data from the clients. Right. You can collect things like the model of the motherboard or hardware stuff. You can read files. You can get all kinds of data from those clients just by using this. Okay, in this case, we are trying to enumerate all the installed software in this particular client. Okay, and you see after a little bit, we've gotten to enumerate all that software that is part of this client, right? And it gives us some extra information about it too, like the product version. So you can see you can actually enumerate. You can go pretty deep with enumerating these target clients with CM Pivot. You have another option too. You can direct those same queries against a collection of devices. So if you want to enumerate all the operating systems and a certain collection, you can do it with a query like this. Okay. Now, for us, this is really interesting, right? Because as attackers, right, we can enumerate all kinds of data from those targets, right? So there's another component, part of Configuration Manager, called the admin service. The administrator service is a REST API that is exposed by Configuration Manager, where we can actually make calls to this CM Pivot component, and with that, through those REST API calls, we can enumerate the data in this way. Okay. Now, here I'm going to show you how we can actually make a call to the administrative service REST API and gather some data from our targets. So here we're using PowerShell to just make a post request to that administrative service REST API. Okay, as you see, the request has a body and it has to be included as JSON, right? That is our actual query. We're doing the same query as we did on the previous demo. We're looking to enumerate the operating system. We're directing that to the management point of our SCCM site. We're calling the admin service API, and in this case, we're pointing it against a collection of devices, right? In this case, we're pointing it to the default all systems collection. Okay. Now, in this case, since we want to use the administrator service REST API to run a CM pivot query, we're using that particular method, the run CM pivot method. And what we want to get from all this is an operation ID. Okay. So if we execute it, you see that we get an operation ID over there. With this operation ID, we can make a subsequent call to the admin service REST API, and then in this case, we're gonna do it on the browser so you can better appreciate how this works. So you see, we call a different method. In this case, is the CM pivot result method, and we're pointing that against that previous operation ID that we got, right? We're also pointing it to the collections again, to the all systems collection, and that is the previous operation ID that we got. And with this request, we've been able to enumerate the operating system of all the clients that are actually awake on the SCCM side at the moment. Okay. Now, now we can start looking at how SharpSCCM actually lets you take advantage or leverage this admin service REST API. Okay, so if we want to point our queries, our administrator service REST API queries against a single resource, a single host, a single target, right? We first need to get the resource ID of that target. In this case, SharpSCCM lets you do that as well with the get and the resource ID option, the get command and the resource ID option. And in this case, we're indicating that we want to get the resource ID for the GW1 host. Once we have that resource ID, we can actually use the new command, the invoke admin service command, to make our REST API queries. In this case, we indicate the query with our -q flag, right? And we're looking to enumerate the operating system of that particular host, the GW1 host, for which we previously got that resource ID. We also have the option to point this towards a collection of hosts. In this case, the SMS0001 represents all the systems that are part of the site. So once we execute a query, you notice there are some output that is telling us that is waiting 5 seconds until the next request. And that is because each of those attempts is trying to gather the data from the admin service REST API. It's trying to gather results. Now, since CM Pivot runs a PowerShell script to gather that data on the clients, it needs some time to be able to make those results available to us. Okay, so that is why the tool needs to take some time between those requests. But in that way, after a certain period, we're able to enumerate the data. Now we have an option too to configure that delay and the maximum amount of tries, right? So in this case, just a second. All right, so in this case, if we use the -d flag, we can actually indicate that we want to use a different default wait time rather than the 5 seconds that it uses by default, right? And in this case, you see after 15 seconds and the first attempt, we're able to gather that data from that host. We've been able to enumerate the operating system for our client target. We also have the option to get the output as JSON, okay, with the -j flag. After some wait, you see that we get the JSON. Now, um, you see that is a lot of output. So something I want to point out is that when you make these queries, you also have the option to apply some filters, okay? And in this way, you can better target the information that you want to obtain. So just as an example of that, here we're going to actually apply a filter to those queries, and we're looking to enumerate all the installed software in that particular host. But in this case, we're only interested in the product name Microsoft Edge. Okay. So after a little bit, we've been able to enumerate the installed software that has that product name of Microsoft Edge. So as you can see, CM Pivot is very, very powerful. You can enumerate all kinds of data from your targets. You can filter it. You can make it work very efficiently for you. Now I'll give it back to Chris.
Yeah, so another couple things you can do with this CM pivot feature are pull session data from event logs. So you can grab like all 4624 from event logs to see who's successfully logged onto a system recently. And once you know where a user has logged in, you know that there's probably credentials on that system. So you might want to move laterally there. You can grab file contents. You can enumerate the names of files. You can enumerate local administrators. There's a ton of these baked in queries to the SCCM CM pivot service that allow you to basically gather whatever information you need from a client without even executing like an agent or additional code. So once you have this full administrator privilege and can run these admin service commands, it really opens up a lot of pathways to achieving your assessment objectives. So that's it for the demos. Really appreciate everybody coming.